Discover Lady Diana's Haunted Tales, a journey into the world of witches. They called her Doña Diana in the neighborhood, a woman everyone whispered about. But what walked into a children's bedroom one night left more than whispers. That line opened every conversation I had with people who lived near her, and it holds tonight. These are not bold claims or big reveals. They are testimonies, ordinary people describing moments when something in their world cracked open and let something else slip through. I collected 4 of those testimonies. A brother who swore he saw his grandmother twice in one night, a child who watched an impossible turkey step into a barred room, a young woman who woke under a weight she could not explain, and a neighbor who followed a cry into a park where candles burned on a hill people called Colina del Olvido, Hill of Forgetting. Each narrator asked me to present what they remember, what they feared, and what they could not explain. I will be careful with words. I will say, the narrator reports, she recalls, they remember. I will not pretend to prove anything beyond these memories. The goal here is to tell these accounts as they were told to me, to hold the tension between skepticism and belief, and to respect the real fear that lived with each person afterward. If you like haunted true accounts, hit subscribe, and tell us in the comments if you've ever felt watched. The first story arrives at the bedside of a dying woman. It is small and domestic until it isn't. They were a family that kept to themselves, a few houses on a quiet street. The grandmother, soft-spoken, a woman of routines, had been ill for weeks. The house smelled of tea and the kind of cleaner people use when they are trying to erase tomorrow's grief. Jose, her grandson, was taking night shifts by the bed. He worked irregular hours at a garage and slept on coffee and whatever rest he could steal between shifts. That night, Jose remembers the world being very small. The bedside lamp, the clock, the steady breath of the woman who had held a neighborhood together. He remembers the cane propped by the chair. He remembers the sound first, a soft tapping on the tile, like someone testing each step. At 2 a.m, he says, he stood and went to the window to check. He saw her. She was at the doorway of the living room, silhouetted by the pale light from the street lamp. She walked with the same slight stoop she always had. The cane clicked. The dress she favored swung the same way. Jose told me he went cold down his spine in a way that had nothing to do with the draft. He blinked. He took a breath. He turned back to the bedroom because she, his grandmother, was lying there, sleeping, her chest rising full and slow. He could see the wheeze soft as old cotton. He says he watched both images at once for a long second, the woman with the cane moving across the hallway, and the woman who had held his hand when he was small, breathing under the lamp.
The sight was impossible, and yet every detail was painfully familiar. He moved to the doorway where the other one had been, and the hallway was empty. The cane lay where it always had. The clock still said 2:00-something. He told himself he'd imagined it. He told himself sleep deprivation did wild things. He returned to the bedside and sat down, shaking. By dawn, he made it through the rest of his shift at the garage. He says something changed in him after that night. He started refusing the late shifts. He stopped sleeping in the house. When we spoke, he described the refusal not as a choice but as a necessity, an edge between him and the thing he'd seen. Family members tried to rationalize, to say grief plays tricks, but he insisted, "I know what I saw." He told me quietly that the second image, standing and walking, had been lighter, almost translucent, and that its lips were moving, but he could not catch any words. The other family members remember the night differently. A niece said she heard the cane click, but thought it was a neighbor. An uncle said he found Jose sitting at the kitchen table, eyes hollow, and that he hadn't been back to the bedside after that. The grandmother passed away a few days later. After the funeral, the house kept the night like a bruise, heavy, slow, with a memory that settled on the furniture. Doppelgangers turn up in folklore in all sorts of ways. Omens at deathbeds, doubles that walk away from the body, or impersonations that take a life. The narrator I spoke with framed it as something that made the room dishonest. After that night, the house no longer felt like a container for memory, but like a place where memory had unstitched itself. There was no overt malice in Jose's account. There was confusion and a kind of resignation. He told me he refused to sleep in that house and moved into a spare room at a cousin's place until the funeral. He avoided being alone in the dark for months. He said the image of the other woman reached him in dreams for a long time, standing in doorways, always with the cane clicking once, twice, twice, like a metronome for something unfinished. What did the family do? They spoke about it, mostly at the kitchen table, in low voices. They joined memory and superstition, the two things people hand each other in the dark. Someone suggested they invited a priest. Someone else said it was grief. No one offered a simple answer. What they offered instead were small acts, closing curtains tight, moving the cane far from the bed, talking louder when the night pressed against the house. Whether to them these acts were practical or symbolic didn't change how they were done. There is a small detail that kept coming back in our conversation. One of the cousins found a photograph folded in an old Bible. The grandmother, younger, standing on a hill with a group of women. The edges of the photograph were browned, the faces smiling in a way that seemed to belong to another life.
The cousin took it as nothing more than family history. Jose took it as a reminder that certain people return to the places they once occupied. I do not know what to do with that photograph except present it as what the narrator presented, a thread leading back into the past, into a neighborhood memory. After we stepped out of that house, after we left Jose with his memories and his sleep troubles, the tone of the testimony shifted from the uncanny object in the room to the way it changed his behavior. It wasn't a story of an exorcism or of a victory. It was a story of a life turned cautious. He refused to return to the night watch. He watched the doorway with a new suspicion. He still visited the house in daylight, but he preferred gardens and afternoon heat now. The double had not chased him from the world. It had only taught him how small the world could feel. The motif of the double, someone who seems to be two places at once, reappeared in the stories I collected. It seemed to mean less that a supernatural being had been proven, and more that ordinary moments near death were permeable. When a body becomes a thinner thing, if you believe the narrators, other things sometimes push through to the lighter side. Years later, in a different town, the pattern repeated itself, but in strange domestic ways. The child who told me about the turkey, guajolote in their mother tongue, had grown up in a house with barred windows and a neighbor they called Doña Diana. Kids in the neighborhood had invented rhymes about her. They learned to lower their voices near her gate. She was the single thread running through their stories, a woman seen in black at her doorway, rumored to be the kind of person people pointed to when they wanted to explain what happened to other people's luck. This child, call her Anna for the sake of the story, though she asked for anonymity, remembered the night that first unsettled everything. She was 6, maybe 7. The house had the locked kind of safety you find in working-class neighborhoods, thick bars on the windows, a padlock on the gate, the neighbor's dog that barked at the wrong hours. Her family watched cartoons on the old TV and ate simple dinners. The sky outside was a bowl of humidity. She heard footsteps on the roof, not the slow drag of rats or the domestic footsteps of someone carrying a bucket, but measured, careful taps, like the rhythm of someone pacing a rooftop in time. She slid off the couch to look out the window. The bars of the window made everything look like a frame of a tiny theater. She says she saw a shadow moving across the tile of the roof, as if someone walked the ridge outside, keeping time. Then the laugh began. It was a sound she says she still hears in her head, a laugh that wasn't right. It wasn't like someone's mouth laughing, she told me. It was like paper tearing slowly, or like something trying to copy a laugh and forgetting the tune.
The laugh came from somewhere close by, behind the wall, from the street. Her mother told her to go to bed. Her little brother said he was scared. After a minute, a sound came from the kitchen window. Something thumped against the bars. They thought it was someone knocking. They threw the curtain back and saw nothing but the neighbor's yellow light across the alley. Later that night, when the house seemed to settle, something extraordinary passed through the living room. Anna remembers the guajolote, which she thought was a turkey, walking in. It should have been impossible. The windows were locked, the bars were secure. The bird would have had no route in, and yet it ambled through like something that had every right to be there. It was large, the size of a small person when it turned its head. Its feathers were too black to be ordinary. Its beak glinted like wet metal under the lamp. The family stared. The bird walked to the center of the room, cocked its head, and let out a sound that did not belong to the cartoons on the TV. Anna told me she watched its eyes and saw none of what she'd expect. They were dark but empty, like polished holes. She remembers the bird's smell most vividly, musty, like a barn after business, layered with something sharp and iron-like. Her mother chased it with a broom, but when they ran to the door, the guajolote was gone. There was no trace on the floor, no feathers left, nothing wet or scuffed, as if it had never been there. The family moved the furniture, swept the tiles, said it must have been a trick of the light. They told the story at the kitchen table and tried, with that typical household rationality, to make the memory sensible. Weeks later, Anna says she saw Doña Diana on the street. The woman was a figure in black leaning on a cane. Anna crossed the street and looked directly at her. The memory of that glance sent Anna into a faint. She fell like someone whose legs no longer belonged to them. People carried her inside. When she came around, she couldn't remember walking, only a fierce heat in her chest and the smell of the bird, as if the guajolote had been tied to Doña Diana the same way a bell is tied to an animal. Neighbors pieced together stories. Some claimed Doña Diana spoke to the birds. Others said she kept turkeys for food. One old aunt swore she had seen birds gather on Doña Diana's roof at dusk and form a ring, like a shadowed chorus. Nothing was proved. Doña Diana tended to her garden and kept to herself. Yet the child's fainting fit had changed the family's rhythm. They stopped walking late at night. They stopped speaking about the alley. They moved a few blocks away the following year, citing work in a cousin's house. The memory didn't go with them. What's remarkable in this account is not just the creature, real or imagined, but the way ordinary domesticity intersects with the uncanny.
Barred windows, late-night cartoons, a broom in a father's hand. These are the details that make the strangeness matter. A turkey in the living room is funny on paper. It's less funny when a 6-year-old loses consciousness in the street. There is another detail in Anna's story that complicates things. After she fainted, someone in her family found a scrap of paper tucked into the gap of a neighbor's gate. It was folded tight and yellow with time. On it were scribbled letters and a faint circle that looked like it had once been scented with candle wax. The family unfolded it in the kitchen. No one there read the writing. Someone joked it was a shopping list. No one laughed for long. The piece of paper ended up in a drawer, and when I asked about it, the narrator admitted she had kept thinking about that circle of wax. She said it felt like a breadcrumb left intentionally, as if someone wanted them to find evidence that something had been there and then go away. I will not say that Doña Diana turned into a turkey or that she sent birds through tiled roofs. I will say that the narrator reported a pattern where Doña Diana's presence, real or rumored, was linked to a series of uncanny events. Animals appearing in impossible places, a laugh that didn't belong to a human, and a child collapsing at a glance. These small coincidences accumulated into a credible fear for a working family who had no interest in folklore beyond keeping their children safe. The third account I collected is more tactile, more intimate in the way it invades the body. This is a sleep encounter story, the kind that sits in the borderland between paralysis and something else. The narrator, a young woman who warned me she relives the night in fragments, described an experience that began with late-night storytelling and ended with her waking to a world rearranged. She had been reading alone in her bedroom late into the night. It was the kind of night when the building breathed, pipes that hissed, faint music from a neighbor's TV. She told me she had been listening to local witch stories as a test, a kind of dare to herself, to see how much she could take before sleep. People should note, this is not an encouragement to look for trouble. It is a detail that sets the stage. She drifted off with the window open a crack and an old fan stirring the warm air. The sensation arrived like pressure from above. She woke feeling like her chest had a weight sitting on it, heavy and slow. Her ears rang. It wasn't an ordinary tinnitus. The sound was a high, thin keening, like someone scraping a metal comb across a glass. She tried to move and found her limbs reluctant. Panic pried at her throat. Then she felt touch, cold fingers at the edges of her mattress, as if someone or something was lifting the bed itself. She heard the mattress creak, heard the fabric groan. Something heavy and wrong pressed against the sheets and pulled, as if to lift the person who lay beneath it.
She remembers seeing shapes at the periphery, 2 pale silhouettes in the room, taller than a man but not quite human. She says they had no eyes, no defined sockets, only pitted smoothness where a face should have been. Their limbs were too long, and they moved in a way that made the young woman's limbs feel small and useless. They did not speak. She could not cry out. She could not roll away. When she finally managed to heave a breath and force movement into her arms, she woke in a sweat. The mattress sagged where the weight had been. The sheets were disordered as if someone had been under them. Her throat hurt as if she had been screaming, though no sound had left the room. She stumbled to the light switch and woke her roommate. They laughed nervously and blamed a nightmare until the roommate noticed the indent in the bed and the damp patch on the sheets where something had pressed hard. No animals were found, no broken window, nothing to account for the imprint and the smell, a sharp metallic tang, like copper and old wire. The roommate dismissed it as sleepwalking. Family suggested stress, and online comments told her she had suffered a common form of sleep paralysis. These explanations helped in a clinical sense, but the narrator insisted on the same detail. Before she fell asleep, she'd been listening to the same witches' stories she often did as a private ritual of curiosity. After that night, she stopped. She changed rooms. She stopped telling people about the encounter because she said the shame of being told it's just sleep paralysis felt heavier than recounting the event. What interests me as a collector of such accounts is that the physical after-effects are real. The mattress still bore the signs, the sheets were still rumpled, and she bore a ringing in her ears that took months to fade. Whether those signs have mundane origins or not, the trauma was real. She slept with the lamp on for a long time. She avoided sleeping on her back. She started leaving the light at the end of the hallway on, like a human breadcrumb marking safe territory. These 3 stories, double at a deathbed, a child and a guajolote tied to a neighbor, and a bedroom invasion by pale, eyeless figures, are separate maps of fear. They are domestic, close to the body. They do not shout conspiracy. They whisper and nudge. That whisper is what makes them sticky. The things people remember most are the small details they can touch. Cane clicks, bird smells, mattress indents. The repeating themes suggest a pattern. Proximity matters, curiosity matters, and certain people or places seem to be called into the stories as anchors. Between each testimony, I spoke to neighbors, to cousins, to those who were there when these things happened.
The common pattern emerged. A rumor feeds a rumor. People point to a woman in black at a gate, and it becomes easier to point at strange noises in the roof. The more the story circulates, the more people listen for the ticking that might confirm it. This does not mean every witness is unreliable. It means that community memory and fear have an ecology. They grow with attention and recede when attention wanders. They can also harden into trauma that follows a person across cities and years. I want to be careful here. None of this is offered as proof that supernatural things exist. It is offered as testimony that, for the people who lived it, something happened that changed how they sleep, how they walk home, how they treat their nighttime shadows. The narrators asked me to keep the dignity of their experiences intact. They did not want to become spectacles. They wanted their stories told honestly. One detail threads through these early accounts and moves towards something else, an old place, a marked ground. In the last testimony I have for tonight's part, one I began to collect but did not finish in our conversation, the narrator mentions a hill in a Tijuana neighborhood, referred to by older folks as Colina del Olvido. She called it that with a kind of bitterness, as if the name itself did something to the map of the town, a place to avoid or to mourn. I will say a little about that place now, because it connects the domestic tales to a broader geography of rumor. The hill sits at the edge of a poor neighborhood, a patch of scrub and open ground that once had a reason to be there, an old well, some forgotten boundary. Over time, the area became a convenient spot for kids to hide, or for families to dump old furniture. Old women in the neighborhood began to say they had once seen groups there at night. Candles, sticks, women in dark shawls. No solid evidence was produced. People swore the lights were merely parties. Others said they were mourning circles, and still others whispered witchcraft. When I asked neighbors about it, some laughed, some clammed up. One man handed me an old newspaper clipping he'd kept folded in a drawer. It was braille and yellowed. It mentioned that in the early 90s an infant went missing, and that the police searched the hill but found no remains. It was careful and clinical, an item in a register of unsolved things. The narrator who told me about the clipping said she kept it because it felt like a black seed in the town's memory. At the moment I leave that account, the narrator, Ariana, who lives in Tijuana, had only just begun to tell me how the hill began to touch her life. She described glimpsing a woman in black on her way home from work, then hearing children cry when no child was there, then noticing candles arranged on the hill at dawn. She said the neighbors would shake their heads and talk quietly when she mentioned it. I did not press her for explanations.
She was ashamed of being afraid, she said, and reluctant to be the person who made a small place into a monstrous one. She was also tired. The encounters had aged her in ways a camera could not catch, quietly hollowed mouths, the way she rubbed her hands when she told the story, the sudden alertness whenever someone knocked on the door. When we spoke, she told me that the first clear escalation came the night she heard a baby cry from the hill. The sound was precise, a single infant wail, a thin thread of might or might not. It came from the slope facing her building. She went out and saw nothing but a row of candles flickering in the grass. There was no stroller, no small shoe, no trace of a person. She called a neighbor who had lived there for decades, and the old woman sighed and told her to leave it alone. Some things, the old woman said, don't want to be remembered. Ariana tried to reconcile that with the newspaper clipping, with the stories she'd heard of women in black, and with the way people avoided the hill.
She started recording her own nights with her phone, not because she believed recording would capture anything, but because she felt the need to have a record if the sound returned. This is where I stop for now, with Ariana standing at the threshold of something that ties the domestic tales to a place that keeps memory like grit in an old wound. She had moved once and thought moving would help, but the crying followed her like a season. She told me she had seen the lights again, the circle of women, and heard the laugh that had been described in a different tone by the child with the guajolote, something that sounded like joy, like cruelty, like a thing imitating human sound. I will bring more voices, more corroborating details, and more of the aftermaths, how people's sleep changed, how they moved, how they chose silence over explanation. What I will not do is claim a neat ending. These stories end messily, in sleep, in a fainting, in an absence. They leave people with practices, closing curtains, avoiding certain streets, moving apartments, that feel like small defenses against something that does not wear a uniform. If any of this resonates with you, or if you've lived a night like these, tell us in the comments. Your stories help map the places where other people have felt watched. For now, keep your doors latched, keep your lamps on when the night presses close, and be cautious about what you invite into the dark by listening too long. When we continue, we will pick up Ariana's account properly, follow the candle circle to its last known witness, and return to Doña Diana's gate to see what others in the neighborhood remember. There are whispers that the same laugh has been heard in different blocks, that a child's cry has been recorded on a phone with no visual origin, and that the imprint on a mattress sometimes tells a longer story than the dream it followed. For these are not tidy tales, they are lived traces. Ariana told me she started keeping a recording app open on her phone the night she first heard the baby, not because she believed it would capture anything miraculous, she said, but because the idea of having a file, something she could point to and say, "Listen," felt like armor against the small, private doubt that had begun to gnaw at her. The night the cry returned,
she went out onto the small balcony that faced the slope of Colina del Olvido. The air was damp and smelled of earth turned underfoot. A stray dog barked somewhere down the block. She held the phone in her hand and recorded for longer than her nerves wanted. The sound she captured is thin and honest when you listen to it. A single infant wail, the kind of urgent note that slices through the ordinary noises of a city. Then a pause. Then something that the narrator described to me in a way that made me lower my voice when I repeated it. A laugh, but not the breathy human kind. A layered, hollow sound that fit awkwardly in the space between joy and mimicry. Ariana said the laugh overlapped the cry for just a heartbeat, like someone pressing two recordings together without caring if they matched. She played it for me quietly. I felt the room tilt in a particular way you only feel when a sound insists on being out of place. When she went up the hill, she found candles arranged in a crude circle, half-burned wicks and a few charred leaves. The wax pooled into small moons at the base of the stones. No people were there. No stroller, no blanket, no toys. The candles were not new enough to be explained by teenagers lighting them for the novelty of it. They had dripped and conformed to the slope.
She photographed the arrangement and sent the file to a neighbor, a woman named Leslie, who had lived on the same block longer than anyone else. Leslie reported seeing lights there often enough to have an opinion. Sometimes they are just kids, she told me. Sometimes it's older women. But other times, you don't want to see who's there. She had a way of saying that without melodrama, quick, matter of fact, like someone reporting the weather. Leslie walked Ariana up the hill one morning. Together they found flattened grass, a faint ring of trampled earth, and bits of wax under the low scrub. Leslie pointed to a half-burned scrap and said, "They say the place used to be for things the town forgot." She did not elaborate into lore. She didn't need to. The phrase, "things the town forgot," carried the weight of municipal neglect and a kind of communal embarrassment. Ariana's phone recording became a hinge in the neighborhood. She played it for a few people quietly. Then, because gossip works the way it does, more folks asked to hear it. Some shrugged and said it could be an animal or a distant radio. A few older women listened and looked away, and one of them, who had been a girl near the hill in the late 80s, tucked a handkerchief into her purse and said, "They used to leave things there at night. People come for other reasons." Her voice trembled, but she didn't call it witchcraft. She called it what we do when we are scared of remembering. This is where record and rumor tangled. The newspaper clipping I mentioned earlier, Ariana had found it in a drawer of a neighbor who kept a stack of old papers, referenced a missing infant and a police search of the hill, but it was sparse on conclusions. It was the sort of brief municipal reporting that lists facts and leaves the reader with the uncanny impression of both attention and impotence. A child reported missing, a search conducted, no remains found, no arrests announced, no answers. The clip's language was careful. It offered no cause, no culprit, only the mechanical choreography of investigation. What the clipping did supply, however, was a memory anchor. People who read it recognized a shape to their fear. A hole in the record became the place story stepped in. I went to the municipal archive after Ariana sent me a scan. There was a file, yellowed at the edges, that confirmed the clipping's bare facts. There was also a police memo that recorded anonymous tips. Light at the hill, women in black. Some people said sounds. Names were not included. The memo reads like bureaucratic fatigue. Items cataloged, leads noted, then a thin line of ellipsis where time and resources and will broke off. This was not a sensational discovery. It was a paper trail of ordinary failure to answer an extraordinary question. The archive did not make the hill haunted. It showed a town unwilling or unable to fully investigate whatever people feared had happened there.
Locals told me that experience with the hill hardened into a social rule. You go around it at night. Shops shutter earlier on the side of town that faces the slope. Parents remind children not to linger. The rule's function, the people I spoke with said, was less about protecting against the supernatural than about avoiding the gossip and the looks from neighbors that follow anyone who spends too much time looking into old, painful things. Curiosity had a social cost. Ariana moved twice in the months that followed. She said she hoped distance would blur the sounds and make the laugh of things she could read about instead of hear. It did not. A recording she had forgotten on a cloud backup came to her attention months later. She played a file from a night when she had been in a different apartment, and again the cry, thin and real, appears, overlapping something else, an exhale that resolves into the imitation laugh. The sound seems to follow. She began to suspect that moving didn't erase attention, it only shifted its range.
Whether that attention was human rumor, a pattern of proximity, or something else, she could not say. Leslie told me about another night when she saw what she called the woman in black walking by Doña Diana's house. She didn't say Doña Diana did anything, only that she, Leslie, had watched a figure in a black shawl lean at the gate, as if expecting someone to arrive. The woman in black carried something wrapped in cloth. Leslie couldn't say what it was, and she didn't want to imagine. She said that in the weeks after, neighbors reported birds gathering on Doña Diana's roof at dusk. Turkeys, maybe, some of them large and glossy. Like they were watching, she said. The birds were mute witnesses. They did not offer testimony beyond their presence. Still, for neighbors who already carried a catalog of small, heavy things, candles, scraps, a folded paper with wax, these details stitched neatly into a pattern. A recurring theme through every testimony I collected was this: the mundane affords a stage. Locked bars and a broom, a cane by the bed, a mattress with an odd imprint. These are not cinematic props. They're the ordinary materials of life. When something odd happens within them, the contrast sharpens the memory. This is why the guajolote in the living room mattered so greatly to Anna's family. It turned a banal setting into an improbable event, and improbability, like spilled ink, marks the surface. I traced that pattern in a few other small ways. A neighbor near the first house where Jose lived told me she had once seen two women in black walking in the rain, their shoes soft against puddled gutters. She remembered the sound of their laughter like wet cloth being wrung. Another woman, an aunt who had been present at the bedside, said more quietly than anyone else that she had seen shadows near a week before the grandmother's death, that didn't belong to any person they knew.
She did not want to be the teller of doom. She wanted simply to register that oddities were multiple and overlapping. The hardest part of assembling these stories is resisting the urge to draw them into a tidy thesis. They intersect without a clear single causal strand. If there is a single current that moves through them, it is one of proximity and noticing. When people gather attention around a person or place, when they whisper a name like Doña Diana, when they point to a hill and say Colina del Olvido, that attention changes what people expect to see. Expectation is its own kind of magnet. But attention also has moral dimensions. Neighborhood gossip can shelter or terrorize. A person who becomes the target of rumor may suffer consequences that have nothing to do with the spectral. I returned to speak with Jose months after our first conversation. He had, in the meantime, joined a small circle of family who went to the cemetery on anniversaries and sat by the grave for no particular religious reason, more to mark that the house's thumbnails of grief were still there. He told me that the flash of the double at the doorway never receded fully. It came in dreams, in headlights on old roads, and sometimes in brief half-visions where a passerby looked like the image he'd seen and then would blink plain and ordinary. He had tried to explain this to friends and met the usual skepticism. He had tried to explain it to cousins and been met with prayer. What interested me about his account was how his life rearranged itself to avoid a feeling rather than a thing. The double did not pursue him across town. It pursued him across memory. One of the people I came to trust was a woman who worked at a small bodega near Colina del Olvido. She had for years listened to the town's small complaints and kept a ledger of local oddities in her head. She told me about a season when families would leave small offerings on the edge of the hill, coins, a rosary, folded paper, things you leave when you want to mark a presence. She said people did this sometimes for grief, sometimes for folklore, and sometimes for reasons that are a mixture of both, a practical superstition coded in communal sympathy. They leave things because it feels wrong to leave empty hands, she said. Sometimes leaving is all there is to do. This mixture, part sympathy, part superstition, sits at the heart of many of these testimonies. It explains why photographs from a Bible and a scrap of wax paper folded into a gate's crevice can seem like evidence. They are evidence of memory, not proof of metaphysics. They are threads people hold on to when institutional answers are thin. In one of our last conversations, Ariana told me about a moment that had made her want me to gather these stories into a single evening, why she thought it mattered for other people to hear it. She said she had once stood at her kitchen window and watched a group of young people walking by the hill at dawn, their heads down, a few carrying coffee cups. One of them paused and looked, not at the candles or the stones, but at her high window, and for the briefest moment, their eyes met. Ariana said she felt seen in a way that made her stomach hollow. It wasn't fear exactly, she said. It was the feeling that attention found me even when I wasn't looking for it. It was like the hill needed a witness. There is danger in telling stories like these, the danger that listeners will want an answer,
a demon to name, a witch to blame. There is another danger, quieter, that the people who live with these memories will become curiosities in someone else's entertainment. I have endeavored to avoid both. These narrators did not ask for spectacle. They asked for witnesses to the fact that their nights had changed. They asked that their fear be treated as real, even if its causes are uncertain. Across the testimonies, a few patterns emerged again and again. The like metronome of a cane, a laugh that does not quite belong to human lungs, birds seen gathering in numbers on roofs, bodies that are perceived twice, at the bed and at the doorway, and places that accumulate a kind of attention, candles on a hill, a gate with a folded scrap inside it. These are not proofs, they are clues. They show how communities forge narratives to manage what they cannot explain. What concerns me most is the after effect. These are not triumphant epics in which people overcome an adversary. They are collections of small adaptations and long-term wear. People changed their habits. They moved apartments. They closed curtains. They slept with lamps lit. Some sought help. Some hugged each other in the kitchen at odd hours. Some told their stories in whispers. In time, the fear became integrated into life, like the house brews I mentioned earlier, part of the texture of memory. There was one final detail I want to leave with you from Ariana's testimony, because I think it ties to everything else. After she moved the second time, months after the hill recordings and the candles, she received a note slipped under her door. It was a small rectangle of paper, the same kind people use for shopping lists, with a single sentence written in a hurried hand. "Don't look for what looks for you." She told me she did not know if someone neutrally admonished her, or if the note was meant to comfort. She kept it folded in her wallet for a month, and then burned it. She told me she burned it not from fear, but because she wanted to perform an act she could understand, closing a small circle with a single, manageable ritual. That action, simple, private, human, struck me as emblematic of how people respond to the uncanny. Sometimes a private, symbolic act is what is possible. It is enough to make a life feel like it has some agency.
It may not stop a sound from following you. It may not make a hill untouchable to rumor, but it allows a person to mark a boundary and, perhaps most importantly, to reclaim a sense of choice. So where does all this leave us? In an uneasy place, perhaps, leaning toward skepticism in some moments, toward belief in others, and always aware that the dignity of the people who lived through these things matters more than the need for resolution. Lady Diana's haunted tales, Doña Diana's name threaded through neighborhoods, do not resolve into a single explanation. They remain a constellation of personal accounts that altered lives and reshaped nights. Whether these accounts describe human cruelty, municipal neglect, the social power of rumor, or something less easily named, they are, above all, experiences people carry with them. If these stories leave you with an image, let it be not only of candles and laughter and a turkey in a living room, but of the quieter aftermath, the person who will not sleep in their own bed, the child who fainted at a glance, the neighbor who keeps a newspaper clipping in a drawer as if it were a talisman against forgetting. These are the traces left behind. I will close with the request the narrators gave me when I asked how they wanted their stories handled. Treat them with care, do not trivialize what they felt, and remember that an unresolved fear is still a real wound. None of the people I spoke with wanted to be icons of the strange. They wanted their nights to be ordinary again. If any of this resonates with you, if you have a night like this, a hill that hums, a gate with folded paper, tell us your experience in the comments below. Share what you remember and how it changed you. Subscribe for more collected accounts of the places that watch and the people who live near them. Be careful what you invite home.